Perfect, perfect.
Is this okay? Yeah?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Let me make it bigger. So, oh no, I want to see some people. Okay. So yeah, just before I connected to the Zoom, I saw the title of this seminar, which is Contemporary Significance of Confucian and Taoist Philosophy. And suddenly, like cold sweat ran down my back because I thought, contemporary significance? I mean, I'm so lost in the weeds of Wuwei and what it means, and like Confucian Wuwei and Daoist Wuwei. I thought, what kind of significance does that have? What kind of relevance does that have, right? So yeah, I caught myself being a little bit, even for some moments, a little bit too your way, right? So let's see if yeah, some relevant questions for contemporary uh, situations can come up, even if I didn't work with these ideas in mind. So, Wuwei Confucianism. Uh, of course, this is not a new idea. Um, it is discussed, of course, as you know, Wuwei is more easily associated with Taoism, and you will find more works discussing Wuwei in Taoism. But there are also some works that focus on Wuwei Confucianism, and particularly Wuwei government. So Confucian political philosophy. But before we go into Wuwei, I thought that it might be a good idea to look at the other side of Wuwei, which is your way. And a way to look at that your way, the other aspect of Wuwei, is to look at these readings of Confucianism, and particularly here the Analects, where you have this kind of um, uh, possibility to rely on some kinds of predictable results. So you have a way to achieve things, right? You have some means to achieve certain ends, and that gives you predictability, or if we don't like this word, if it is too strong, we can say it gives you some foresight, at least, or it gives you high probability of achieving desirable outcomes. So yeah, I remember I was thinking about the idea of promise in Confucianism, and I was talking about it with Paul, and I said, I don't think that Confucianism really promises you something, or Confucius promises you something. And I remember Paul saying, well, you can read the Analects basically as a compilation of promises. You can read every or most of the Analects as like promises, or as this kinds of like setting up these situations where you have a certain condition and then you have this outcome that can come, this causal, let's say, relations that create predictability. And of course, yeah, we can think about this from a consequentialist perspective and say that this is where the rightness comes from, right? Exactly from these positive outcomes, or the contrary, from the negative outcomes. This is where the wrongness comes from. So yeah, this is a valid way to understand what Confucianism, let's say, has to offer. But of course, there is nuance in these consequentialist readings out there, right? So we have, for example, Ivanhoe's consequentialism, and him saying, early Confucian ethics can best be understood as character consequentialism, an ethical theory concerned with the effects actions have upon the cultivation of virtues, and which concentrates on certain psychological goods, particularly certain kinship relationships, which it regards not only as intrinsically, but also instrumentally valuable as the source of more general social virtues. And according to character consequentialism, the way to maximize the good is to maximize the number of virtuous individuals in society. But because human virtues cannot be cultivated by pursuing their good consequences directly, they must be sought as expressions of a life ideal. This ideal entails developing one's nature to fulfill heaven's design. So we can see here some kind of, let's say, we might say some kind of even implicit, right? A kind of syncretic approach, because we see some virtue ethical elements here, right? We see character, we see heaven's design. So there is some kind of implied teleology there. However, yes, this is a kind of like, let's say, a kind of consequentialist that would fit the Confucian project for Ivanhoe. And then you have Fan Shudong, who says that, who proposes a different version of consequentialism. And he says neither Confucius nor Mencius is suspicious of the human pursuit of benefit. So benefit is not evil, basically. This is the point of his article, Consequentialism and the Possibility of a Confucian Mohist Encounter. And that's why he sees this encounter as possible, because benefit can be seen as basically acceptable, right? In considerations of Confucian morality. So indeed, both affirm it as having a positive value. Moreover, they both use the concept of benefit in their definition of rightness. On the surface, it might appear as if Confucius and Mencius primarily emphasize humaneness and rightness, but on closer inspection, we find that the ideas of humaneness, rightness, renyi, right, and humane government are defined primarily in terms of benefit. As we learn from Mengzi, a rational utilitarianist has to commit to what the Mozi calls the exchange of mutual benefit. This is the acceptable kind of benefit, right? This is a kind of smart consequentialism, let's say, not naive consequentialism. Yes, the version of consequentialism. Yes, naive utilitarianism, or is not what this is, and he upholds a kind of deliberated utilitarianism. A utilitarianism basically that takes relations into account and takes the other person's benefit into account. And Fan Shudong uses the example from the Mengzi. King Hui asks Mengzi what teachings he has that would bring profit, right? This famous passage, and Mengzi says, yeah, why do you need to talk about profit, about benefit? Rather, you simply have to change and refine your strategy for doing so. The king has to stop openly using the word benefit or profit as a slogan, speaking of benefit, asking for benefit, and instead learn how to speak the language of humaneness and rightness. If we could call the old King Hui a naive utilitarian, this new King Hui would have changed into a shrewd or deliberating utilitarian, says Fan Shudong. And then we have non-consequentialist readings, virtue ethical readings, right? Van Noorden, who says that early Confucianism is a form of Aristotelian virtue ethics, but offers different conceptions of the good life, the virtues, human nature, and ethical cultivation. And Mohism is a version of consequentialism. And interpretation of the passage we saw when the Mohists claim that the business of a benevolent person is to promote what is beneficial to the world and eliminate what is harmful. Mengzi replies that emphasizing profit or benefit is self-undermining. Aiming directly at profit is paradoxically unprofitable. So that's another reading. And there is another non-consequentialist reading. Maybe you recognize the person behind this idea. In his article, The Value of Falsity in the Mencius, Early Confucianism is not consequentialism. An article I strongly recommend our students to read. For Confucian thinkers, says Paul, whatever is appropriate in a given circumstance is itself moral. There is no reason to attach special importance to truth-telling or view deception as inherently moral. So Paul suggests this, proposes this amoral reading of certain behaviors that we would like, to which we would assign value, right? We would assign moral value or not, like in this case, lying and pretense. So Confucian morality includes the use of falsity or deception without appealing to any form of consequentialism. That is, it is good because it has benefits, right? So lying becomes good, let's say, for example, in the case of the sheep stealing passage, right? To cover for your father and so on. There is no need to apologize or make excuses for misrepresenting a situation or one's own psychological content when it is the appropriate behavior. So amorality is tied to this concern, right? This focus on situational appropriateness. Confucians emphasize that morality and its concrete expressions should not be viewed independent of the situations in which they arise. When dishonest methods prove necessary, there is no need to apologize for or justify them as they become moral themselves. So we don't need good consequences. There are no fixed good consequences that come out of fixed behaviors, right? And the opposite, of course. And Tillman talks about the Chen Liang and Chu Si debate. Chen Liang had a utilitarian relativistic view of values, and he thought that moral standards are not absolute principles, what we find in the classics. They are historically embedded. And this is why he accused Chu Si, basically, of ignoring real circumstances and constantly looking back into an idealized past, abstracted from reality. So Chen combined historical studies and utilitarian ethics to attack Chu Si's position that Confucian ethical values were timeless, rejecting their absoluteness. And for Chu Si, on the other hand, Chen dismissed the classics while mastering history, ignored the ethical way of the true kings while esteeming the expedient methods of the hegemons, and went to extremes discussing the rise and fall of recent and ancient dynasties without looking for the reasons of the downfall in the heart mind. So back to Wuwei. Here I was, yes, it's okay. Yeah, we move on. I really want to leave some time. I don't want to be the person, the curtain person. So Wuwei appears in the Wei Ling Gong passage, right? And it appears once in the Analects. The speculation is that it's the first appearance of this term, but it is debatable. Perhaps for some scholars, perhaps it is an interpolation. But anyway, it's there. And let's try to understand what it means, at least how some commentators have interpreted Wuwei. Wuwei as the phrase is, used also in modern Chinese. So 无为而治者，己顺也与？夫何为哉？公己正难念而已矣。So this is Wuwei, right? This is the way. This is Wuwei governance, and what did Shun do? What did this paradigmatic ruler do? He was just sitting with this aura of respectfulness around him, having cultivated respect for himself, conducting himself with respectfulness, and facing the south. That is, sitting in the place of the ruler. And that's all. He didn't have to do much more. So in He Yan's or He Yan Committee's commentary, we read, it says that if the ruler appoints the right people to the right positions, he can rule without force, or Wuwei or Zhi, and all will be governed well. So this reading is somehow closer to not doing much, just appointing, delegating, and sitting there, and everything will run smoothly. And Wang Fuzhi, this is from Slingerland's translation of the Analects. Wang Fuzhi says that Shun's Wuwei is similar to Confucius's not innovating, right? In both cases, the point is that one follows along with the times and thus utilizes them effectively, thereby gradually accumulating one's achievements, making oneself reverent. This gongji, right, refers to cultivating virtue within oneself. Taking one's position facing south refers to allowing one's regulating force to be applied to the common people. All of this refers to the constant way of the ruler and cannot really be spoken of as doing anything in particular. So this would be a reading that is the furthest away from doing nothing, because we are talking about the cultivation of virtue. This is the key aspect here that we will come back to. And Zhu Xi's interpretation, which is somewhere in the middle, somehow a middle position, like, okay, yeah, you have to do something so as to reach the state where you seem to or practice Wuwei, right? You do nothing. Wuwei governance means that the sage's virtue, right? So Wuwei is associated here with becomes abundant, and the people are transformed without the need for forceful action. Shun is particularly praised because continuing after Yao, he appointed capable people to various positions, making his governance appear to leave no traces, right? Invisible. 见其犹为之计也. To conduct oneself respectfully is the outward expression of the sage's respect for virtue. Since there is no forceful action, what people see is just this. And the modern commentator, Fu Peirong, and yeah, it's interesting to read also his modern Chinese translation. 孔子说, it's somehow, yeah, I always like reading his modern Chinese translation too, because it's so, it is somehow, it speaks a little bit more directly, to put it simply. 无所事事而知好天下的人，大概就是舜吧。他做了什么呢？只是以端庄恭敬的态度坐在王位上罢了。So Wuwei governance is also a fundamental idea of Daoist Lao Tzu, he says, but the difference lies in Confucius's emphasis on conducting oneself respectfully while facing south. So the difference is that there has been some Wuwei work done here, right? There has been a cultivation process that results in this attitude. This means that a ruler seated on the throne facing south bears the responsibility of cultivating virtue and fulfilling duties. Governance relies on recognizing and appointing capable people, delegating responsibilities accordingly, rather than literally doing nothing. And in the Mengzi, we don't really find the phrase Wuwei, but we find some similar formulations or similar ideas, like, for example, 人心之善也，有水则就下也。人无有不善，水无有不下。So this is like the xing, our xing, right? Our sprouts, our four sprouts. This is what allows us to be Wuwei, that we're already predisposed somehow to act in a certain way. So we don't have to force ourselves. And then, of course, 恻隐之心, like the heart of compassion for others. This is from the famous child in the well story. And this 良能 and 良知, which is a kind of capacity we have and a kind of knowledge we have already, something, right? Something somehow 已有的, right? And the idea here in this description of Yao Shun as the highest exemplar compared to Tang and Wu, because whatever they were came from their Xing. And whereas for Tang and Wu, it came from their Shen. Shen here means practice, basically, right? Like lived experience. So they had to experience, they had to practice. Their goodness had to go through praxis, right? But for Yao Shun, it was natural. So the implication is that goodness does not need deliberate action. It grows naturally out of our dispositions. However, these need to be, like the sprouts, protected from bad environments, from bad habits, and expanded, right? The words Mengzi uses are 推 or 打, expanded through learning and ritual. So here we see the relation between Wuwei and your way, like we already have some way, it's already there, and this is the condition for an Wuwei, for Wuwei action. Also in the Xunzi, actually, we do find Wuwei, we do find the formulation Wuwei. The subtle person, yeah, I used some translations, but I also tried to translate myself. I don't know if this translation says something. I don't know, the subtle person, yeah, is the utmost person. Why would he need to force things? Why would he need to endure hardship or be in danger? This is how outwardly he appears calm, and inwardly he has clarity. A sage goes with his desires. 圣人从其欲, attunes them with his emotions, guiding them with reason. So why rely on force? Why endure? And why fear anything? The way of the kind-hearted person is effortless. 古人者之行道也，无为也. And the way of the sage needs no force, right? 无强也. And here again, of course, this idea of 德治, right? The idea of governing through virtue. So Wuwei is tied to this cultivation. It is the outcome of the cultivation. Confucius was looking at the flowing water of the East, and Zigong asked him, why is it that the decent man always looks at great waters? Confucius replied, water nourishes all living things without effort, like virtue. So if we had to like somehow summarize Confucian Wuwei and Daoist Wuwei, right? What would be their difference? And this is basically the main point also made by scholars like Ziporin, like Slingerland, like Ames and Rosemond, and A.C. Graham. They have variations of this kind of differentiation. So Confucian Wuwei would be something like, I dared to somehow come up with a Chinese phrase to describe it. Yo wei or fada wu wei. So it is a wu wei that comes out of yo wei. It is a yo wei rooted wu wei. And this happens by addition, right? A cultivated effortlessness that happens by addition. I say this somehow schematically, of course, referring to something, like for the students, basically, you're very familiar with, right? There's this daily reducing that we find in the Tao Te Ching, right? By subtraction. So cultivated effortlessness versus spontaneous effortlessness. So this would be a Wu Wei rooted Yo Wei, right? Wu Wei or Wu Bu Wei. So it looks like somebody's doing something wonderfully, right? It looks like somebody has a way, like remember Cook Ding, and the king looks at him and he suspects, right, that, wow, what is your way? Where does this come from? You certainly have some way, right? But the root is Wuwei. And in the Confucian, let's say, understanding, it would be the opposite. But through the effort, you would reach the point where your action would become effortless. So the Taoist would be Yo Wuwei or Fada Yo Wei. So yeah, you can read this quote, which I use in my introduction to Taoism class, by Ben Gordon, this player, NBA player. You lose track of time, what quarter it is, you hear the crowd, you don't know how many points you have, you don't think, you're just playing. Offensively, everything is instinctive. When the feeling starts going away, it's terrible. I talk to myself and say, come on, you got to be more aggressive. That's when you know it's gone. It's not instinctive anymore. So, I mean, yes, like this is some kind of a trope, right? Like often we use examples from sports when we want to describe this state or this kind of optimal, like frictionless kind of action, right? Or scenario of Tao. We use these NBA players or musicians, right? Very talented musicians. But yes, you can also look at it through Confucian Wuwei. So if this was a slide for introducing Confucian Wuwei, I would say that through cultivating the skills and cultivating the virtues, right, required for performing this particular act, you reach a point when it looks like you're not really putting in much effort. So Wuwei Confucianism, yeah, if we look at the first passage in the Analects, because this was actually my starting point, thinking about this idea and reading about it in other scholars' works. The very, very first passage, right? To give yourself to learning and to have the chance to apply what you have been learning at the right moment, isn't it also a joy? So we can say that, to go back to this this kind of like this grid of conditions producing certain outcomes, and these outcomes becoming the criterion for assigning moral value, right? Or the lack thereof, right? Yeah, we can take, let's say, a more somehow tempered view, and say that there is no disregard for effort and outcomes in Confucianism, but then there is no fixation on some kind of preconceived outcomes. And there is this concerning the Analects we find, which of course we saw also in the Mengzi, developed in the Mengzi, the concern which has to do with the role of Li. That is how much you are thinking about benefits when you act. And at the same time, we can preserve openness to unpredictability, tolerance for uncertainty, and maybe we can think of a different orientation or directionality, right? Outcomes, let's say Yue as an outcome, the joy can be thought as a condition. That is, what Confucius is saying here is like, if you don't feel this, and this is not something we don't find in other passages in the Luyu, right? The idea that if you don't have the right emotional reaction to learning, then there's something wrong with your learning. So if there is no joy, if this condition is not there, then there's something wrong going on here. And not to see it like as an outcome. I want to learn because I want to feel happy. You know, this obsession that we find in contemporary classrooms, right? Where the students expect to be somehow constantly excited and entertained. And we more or less have to keep that in mind and become, to a certain degree at least, entertainers, educators as entertainers. So this joy, yeah, becomes something which is yeah, it somehow obscures the very process of learning itself. And also it obscures, of course, and it downplays other important aspects of learning, which are there, right? Learning is a very complicated process, and it produces very contradictory emotions and constantly changing emotions. So we can think about the directionality a little bit more flexibly, a little bit differently, a little bit more less predictable, but still with some kind of probability there at hand. So, yeah, to put it like in more words, we can say that Holmes's teachings are best appreciated as more present and process-oriented, sensitive to contextuality and concerned with decoupling the work of self-improvement from fixed expectations about specific and measurable personal and social benefits, while not disregarding benefits. Promise giving, for example, or predictive pronouncements can be read as illustrations of the good life, a life focused on the work of the here and now and on responding to a reality of change, difference, and potential. There are also lessons on the importance of trust. Trust in authority and transmitted knowledge that it is no need of proof in the form of promised foreseeable results. The promise of Confucianism is thus best understood not as a monolithic image of a personal or collective future that precedes and outshines human efforts. Confucianism is oriented towards a plurality of possibilities available and emergent in the midst of humans broadening the way, Hong Dao, in the present moment. And to go back to the idea of Xue and the idea of outcomes, and yeah, to put it very simply with this question, why read? This is, I remember, I think I mentioned it to Michael while he was in Macau, that I used this example to talk to my students about, let's say, this Wuwei attitude, kind of encouraging them to cultivate a more Wuwei attitude when it comes to their studies, because the students are really, really fixed on the outcomes. I mean, outcomes are part of our syllabi. We have intended learning outcomes. And for the students, of course, their intended learning outcomes are grades and XueFan credits and GPA. The GPA is really like a ghost hanging over the classrooms. So there is this fixation, and I try to somehow, yeah, inspire them to focus a little bit, to switch a little bit, even momentarily, their mind and their behavior, right, to process, to focus on the process. And of course, this does not annul the importance of the outcome. It is exactly this idea that focusing on the process will bring the outcomes in the most frictionless way. So how do I convince them to read if reading is not tied to a specific outcome? Because it is not. It is not possible. So I show them this photo of the book that I was very attached to when I was their age, Dostoevsky's Idiot. And I told them, I don't really know how to convince you to read this book. I cannot tell you that it is going to make you feel in a certain way or think in a certain way. It is not going to make you wiser or happier. Very probably it's going to make you sad. So why read it? Why go into this process if we don't know the outcome? And we don't know if it's good or bad, and we don't even know if it's like short term or long term, right? Sometimes something we read wakes up in our head or starts growing in our heads many, many years later, right? Or maybe it never does. So, yeah, so the answer was that we can think about this as something which we inevitably do. That is, we are it is part of our thing to create relations, to go into relations. So the question why read this book would be similar to me to why have a friend, why make a new friend, or why have a new relationship with someone. Is it because it's going to make you feel better? Is it because it's going to make you happy? Well, again, very probably not. Or anyway, it's not going to make you consistently happy. It's not going to give you measurable, consistent results, positive results. So why read? Because this is what we do. This is how we engage with the world. We create relations with things and with people, and it is through them that we grow. So yeah, that was it. I'm glad we have some time for you guys to
Wow, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful.
So any
So
questions or comments?
yeah, let's open this up. Any questions?
You're
Yeah,
taking
Luya.
Wuwei
Yeah,
very
please.
literally.
Luya.
Hey, Lu Yao, hi.
Hi, Richard. I have a question about your discussion about the difference of Wu Wei in Confucianism and Daoism. You have mentioned that the Wu Wei in Confucianism is like by the method of You Wei to realize Wu Wei, and but in Daoism is to by Wu Wei to doing the You Wei. I'm kind of confused about why the Daoism would like to do 有为 by 无为. I mean, why they ends in 有为 but not 无为?
I mean, yeah, this is a way to say that Wuwei is not an absolute, right? This is not absolute negativity, right?
Mm.
This is like the condition for Changde, right? It's a condition for constancy, for success, basically, for constant production and movement and smoothness, right? So it is a condition for everything to be there and everything to be happening somehow as it should. So that's why I say that Wuwei is the condition for Yo, right? Wu is the condition for Yo.
Yeah, but why we need to end up for you? Because like as you mentioned that the Confucianism will end up in 无为, but why the Daoism on the opposite
Yeah,
in 有
I
为?
know. Yeah, it sounds like it ends up there, but I know you're right to point that out. Yeah, it shouldn't sound like that you end up your way. No, it's I use it more like loosely, more metaphorically, like you end up being very very efficacious. Yeah, you end up having the best possible like scenario of productivity and movement and
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome, Lu Yao.
Well, let me ask a quick question too. So, Dimitra, this was absolutely wonderful, as was your previous one. And one quick question just on the beginning part of this, so I fully agree that Confucianism is not a consequentialist position, and I also fully agree it isn't really a virtue ethics position, even though, as we've discussed before, that's become such a dominant reading, especially in the American rereading of Confucianism. I would love, however, to hear more of your critique about why, given what you're discussing with Wu Wei in particular, why virtue ethics doesn't really work with Confucianism. Again, I fully agree. I would just love to hear it articulated.
Yes, this is a question which is, yeah, at the same time easy, but also difficult. Difficult
Exactly.
because, yes, it is difficult because this account is very compelling. And it's very
Yes,
compelling
exactly.
because you have so many equivalents, right?
Yes,
Even lexical equivalents, right? So you
exactly.
have character, right? You have character in Aristotle, and you have this. Maybe you don't have the idea for character, but you have this building up of this 理想人格, right? In Confucianism, you have the 君子, you have the贤人, right? You have the 圣人. So you have this equivalent terms, right? You have virtue, you have 德, and also Confucianism has this concept cluster, right, of virtues, which somehow also are a very good match for the Aristotelian virtues. What else do you have? You have a concern for the situational particulars, right? You have this mistrust in absolute rules. So you have this kind of flexibility, let's say, or adapting a tested norm or a tested rule to your particular situation. You have this context sensitive, right, element, the element of context sensitivity. So I would say that, yeah, on the surface, and this is also how I try to explain it to students. On the surface, there seem to be similarities, but there are very big differences when we go deeper, right? When we go to the presuppositions, when we go to the cosmology, when we go to Aristotle's teleology, which is not there in Confucianism. So we have a different conception of the person, of the self, of agency. I mean, we have discussed through the seminar, right, a lot about the role of reason and how reason is basically what makes us humans. And if we turn to Confucianism, reason is not there, at least it's not there as a part of the definition of what a human is, right? And humans are understood as relational beings. Of course, relations are there in Aristotle, but they are not substantive somehow. They are not constitutive of humanity, of what a human is. They are somehow derivative, right? Relations are derivative. So yeah, lots of differences, like and it's I try to understand what is it that somehow, even though we have been through the age of innocence, if I can say, right, when it comes to reading non-Western philosophies, right, we are not innocent anymore. We are not forgiven if we translate Tian as God, right, or heaven, or yes, we have been through this age of innocence, but we are more culturally aware, and we want to be also more inclusive and more pluralistic when it comes to our ways of thinking, more tolerant, right? However, yes, this narrative is still very powerful, right? It still makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. And I think that this way of reading obscures what is most fascinating about Confucianism. At the same time, it obscures Confucianism's very complicated and also fascinating relation to Taoism. And at the same time, I think it does not do service to a thorough understanding of Aristotle. It somehow becomes this like bleach, right? That makes everything somehow one and the same dull color.
Yeah, thank you. That was absolutely beautiful. I really hope you will write up this critique someday. This is absolutely wonderful. It's become again.
Yeah, we write it with Paul.
Good, because it's become such a dominant motif again, especially in the American rereading of Confucianism. And yes, I think you are absolutely right, and this is a wonderful critique.
Yeah, maybe another way to think about it too, right, is you can just think of sort of the starting point, right? Because the starting point with a virtue ethics has to be virtues, right? And then, of course, then you have to sort of understand them, and you have to try to whatever embody them or cultivate them or something like this, right? And it doesn't seem like that's the starting point, at least in the Analects, for example, right? The starting point is to interact well with other people, very much dependent on your roles and relationships, which is why the role ethics also has a strong voice or so. And then, I mean, the way that you always see it, right, is then this type of interaction, we call that whatever virtue, right? So, I think there's sort of a reversal there, right? And it seems that, especially in some readings of the Analects in particular, that and also the way that Confucius responds, right? He never says what the virtue is actually, right? He just gives another example.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
prioritizes just basically interacting well, right? It does not prioritize the virtue. So it seems like the virtue is always sort of like an afterthought. It's a way to sort of cluster certain types of sort of patterns or whatever that might help it make it easier for us to understand. But it doesn't mean that we model that, like we model it as a virtue. What we're really after is just interacting well, which then, yeah, maybe we call this or we call this or whatever, right?
Yes.
But it also doesn't necessarily mean that you would never think about it as somewhat of a virtue, right? Or like you think about the model sometimes, right? But I really think that the main thing that you're after is interacting well with other people, and the nature or like how that is classified is not the most important thing, right? And what you're focused on is not modeling that someone did this sort of like you could draw out of what they did this particular thing. Rather, what you're going after is sort of like how they analyze all these different aspects and blah, blah, blah. So, but I do think some people might say, well, that's basically virtue ethics. But then I think you would just respond like, but why does it have to be that, right? Like, it doesn't have to, because once you call it virtue ethics, you're just prioritizing the virtues. So it's a question of what sort of do you put first, right? And I think if you're not putting virtue first, then it makes sense not to classify it as a virtue ethic. Louis,
and also like on this point, also the idea of the mean, right? The idea of the mean is that you cannot move out of this grid, right? There is a grid, right? There is excess and there is deficiency, right? You are in this grid and you have to find like the balance. You have to balance different demands, right? But you don't have the same kind of like the same range of choice. Like it's not as messy, right? Like when you have to choose between, let's say, lying and absolute like truthfulness, like revealing everything, right? You have to find the mean between those two and not reveal too much and not hide too much. But there is no option, for example, for lying, right? So there are things which are out of the question. And this makes it, of course, more predictable, more easy to describe, but then it also makes it very different from Confucianism, where it's not that everything is like possible. It's not 都可以, right? It's not 都可以, but it's 无可无不可. Like you don't have a fixed beginning. You don't have something that you somehow by definition are not going to do, or that you are going to do. And this doesn't mean everything is possible, right? Yeah, it's a much more nuanced account, I would say. It's just a much more nuanced account. Or as Michael likes to say, much more honest. Like, let's be honest. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah, this is wonderful. I truly hope the two of you will write an article, Why Confucianism is Not a Virtue Ethics. Yes.
Yes.
Truly.
And I don't want to write it alone. I don't want to write it alone because I will be a BITCH. And if Paul writes it alone, he's going to be the JERK. So if we write it together, yeah, I think it's going to look better.
And one day you can tell me what those words are that you just spelled.
Because he cannot spell.
Luya has another question.
Yes, Luya,
Yeah,
please.
This word we can say. It's part of 四海为学 vocabulary. We can say the word jerk. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is
Yes,
about
Luya.
Yes.
sorry, about the relation. I'm wondering why this in Confucianism they will prioritize the like human relation or role ethics rather than the virtues. I mean, that for example, the Ren itself is caring for others, so that is quite related to the human relationship, and also other such as E or other kinds of virtues are also related to the human relations. So why, I mean, why we say that Confucianism will pay more attention on the human relations rather than the virtues? Could they just pay the same attention to this two things? Oh, yeah.
Luya, I think it's
yes.
go ahead. No, Dimitra, you can go.
No, just one phrase, and you continue because you raised this. It's just that because relationships make up what Ren is, what Yi is, what Li is. These are not some ideals, right? Not some pre-existing, let's say, forms that are instantiated in different ways, in different situations. It is the situations which constitute what Li will be in a certain moment. Maybe in a certain moment, Ren is to show care or to not be able to stand another person's suffering. Maybe in another moment, Ren would mean that you would have to kill someone. Isn't that also a possibility?
Oh, yes, that's true. But could we just say that there are multiple meanings inside the more general concept of Ren, that Ren would have like.
But there are so many meanings, Luyao, that it just becomes impossible to define, right? You only have some partial definitions of these behaviors, right? You only can shed light on them on one particular, like, oh, this is what Xiao looks like, or this is what Ran looks like. You cannot provide like one exhaustive definition for each of these, right? Ways of being moral. Can you? Sorry,
it's
Paul.
hard.
I mean, this is also what Paul was talking about the last time, right? About the ineffability of morality. That's also part of it. right? Like the Chinese tradition is very much aware of this and somehow appreciates and even, I don't know, even celebrates the fact that morality cannot fit within a finite number of linguistic formulations. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I think another way to think about it is, yeah, of course you have like whatever range Ren, right? So you can say that if you focus on Ren as a virtue, then this like gets you there. But I think, and that's one way that the tradition has been read for sure. So I think that's possible. But the way that I read the Analects and some other people, right, and then you also like Guoxiang, right? I think this is also the way Guoxiang reads the Analects, is that when you approach these, I mean, Guoxiang would definitely not like the idea of virtues, right? Because he doesn't like ji. So, and also Dimitra talked about ji earlier. But the idea would be, so like when you're in a situation or when you have an issue, right? You have a problem, okay? Um, what what's the sort of advice? Is it to think immediately about a virtue and then through the virtue try to analyze what to do? Or is it to, I don't think it's that. Maybe in some cases it is, maybe because it's like a very difficult situation and like you really don't know what to do. But I think for the most part, although I'm not even sure about that, but I think for the most part, the idea is you just try to figure out like what's the best thing to do in this situation. And thinking about what the best thing to do in this situation, you might then consider ideas like ren or yi, right? But the first thing you do is just to think about, because I think Brooke Zaporn does a very good job of reminding us of this, right? Like you never have a neutral starting point, right? You're always, when we talk in philosophy, especially in contemporary academic context, we often speak as if you start from somewhere neutral, right? And we do the same thing in politics, for example. But you ask, like, what's the political philosophy of the Laozi? You ask it as if the Laozi is talking about, or even the Zhuangzi, right? And for your Guoxiang project, Lu Yao, I think this is also important. We talk about this sometimes as if the text is creating or wants to create a state out of nothing, right? Something like what Plato imagined. But that's not how these texts operate, right? So when you approach a situation, the texts don't pretend that you don't start off preferring certain things, right? That you don't have some idea of how you would like things to go, right? And this is hopefully, I think the idea is in Confucianism, hopefully you've learned enough that your preferences, your taste, right, is, and this is also, by the way, like a lot of these key terms, right, they're very much related to taste, actually, right? Like, right is like something that is disgusting, right? That's the sort of made meaning of it. It's something that doesn't taste good. Anyways, so this is what you want to do is cultivate your taste, basically, so that when you're in difficult situations, you are sort of naturally or like spontaneously, Wuwei sort of sense, want them to go in a way that is somehow also Confucian or something like this, right? So and then so you sort of consider what the best way might be to direct things so that they might be oriented towards that type of direction, right? And again, sort of in doing so, you might grab onto a certain model or a certain virtue or something like this, right? But for the most part, doing that first is actually more problematic, because what happens when you do that first, if you go into a situation, like if you go see your parents, right, Lu Yao, and the first thing you do is think of what is xiao, then what you've automatically done is you've distanced yourself from your parents, right? What you should do, right? Like Fei Xiaotong also talks about this, right? Like what you should do is you should go into the situation and think like, what, how would my parents, how could I make them enjoy themselves? How could I make them feel on, right? That's how Fei Xiaotong would say it. So, and that idea really is basically empty without you and without your parents, right? Which is also what I think what Dimitra was saying. So even focusing like on, right, is useless basically, unless you think about it in terms of how I made my parents on, in which case you're definitely doing the wrong thing, right? So I think it's again, I think it's really a matter of sort of what is prioritized, right? If we want to like look back and say, oh, what Lu Yao did was very xiao, right? Yeah, we can say that. And that might be a really accurate description of what you did. But Giuseppe, what he should learn from that is not, exactly what you did as a sort of virtue or so, right? But what he should learn from this is the, is basically something again that he will sort of embody, that will change his taste, that will change the way he sees the world, not give him a particular idea to grab onto and then to try to implement or try to reflect, right? That's always the way that we say it looking backwards. But looking forwards, I think that's not very useful for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dimitra. Thank you, Michael.
And I agree. This makes perfect sense. Perfect sense.
Michael, you need to go.
Oh, no, I have until 10:15. My meeting's not till 10:30. There just wouldn't have been time to run from home to 10:30. It's a half an hour walk. But truly, I hope the two of you will write this article. It would be so incredibly important.
I was thinking about Wuwei in terms of Confucius as an instructor, or to make it a little bit more Wuwei as a counsel, right? Counseling, right? Let's say maybe instruction is too your way, too interventionist. Yeah, and I was thinking of the Taiwo passage where he thinks it's better. He doesn't mourn, right, for 3 years, but only for one. And when he leaves, Confucius turns to his companions and he says, Buran. And he doesn't say it to him directly, right? So, yes, I was thinking that this might be like an example of Wuwei counseling, in the sense that because we remember, right, this dialogue, basically Confucius is not pushing any agenda, right? He's not pushing any kind of teaching on the Taiwo. He's not telling him like, oh, this is what you should do, right? Like what Paul was saying right now. There is no fixed way to deal with this. And maybe what is there for you to grab on is only your own emotional reaction. So that's why he tries to tap into that, right? And say, how would you feel, right? So how would you feel? And he says, I would be okay. So, okay, go ahead and do it, which I think is like kind of a hands-off, right? Kind of counseling or teaching. But then he turns to the others and he says, Buran, right? So then this somehow becomes a lesson, of course, for them, right? But it also, we might say that it is a way to remind people that whatever you do is going to have an effect on others, even when you think that you're just acting in your own little world, right? You are changing the ritual because it fits you, you think it's good, but you are also affecting others, and in return, others are going to affect you because they're going to think you as Buran, right? So there's going to be, I don't know, I mean, today maybe we would say peer pressure, right? So there is this kind of like reminders, right? And this very kind of, like I would say it's an Wuwei way to effect changes, right? Like allowing, right, these these influences, or allowing this relationality to work out what it is to work out, becoming somehow the medium, right, for this relationality to operate.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Like Paul. Paul is the medium, allowing relationality to operate on this platform.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, that's absolutely
extra
true.
large. What do you mean? Medium was like 7 years ago. Okay, maybe we can finish here. I think it's okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let me say just what a tremendous joy this has been in all of the ways that Confucius uses that term, to be here with you all. So, Paul, this has been unbelievably exciting. Thank you so much for organizing both this course and the entire medium, indeed, to use Dimitra's term, which has been so exciting for the community. Dimitra, thank you so much for being such a key part of this. Both of your presentations were amazing. And to the rest of you, thank you so much for being such amazing members of this community. The questions and comments have been invaluable. I've learned so much through this. So thank you so much.